And the big thing about cults is if you think you cannot be taken in by a cult, you are ripe to be taken in by a cult, right? You are ripe. If you think that you're too smart and you would never fall for that and blah, 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 you're an idiot. It can happen to anybody. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care whatever. If somebody gets you at the right time and the right level of desperation and offers you community and offers you love, you will fall for it.
There's a great book. It's called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. Amazing book.
That sounds like my kind. That sounds right up my alley. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. And in the book, he expressed the idea that marriage is a cult. Would you agree? For
marriage
women,
is a cult.
For women.
I mean, the studies show that marriage is worse for women than it is for men. Men live longer when they're married. Men are healthier when they're married. Men live better lives when they're married. Women often don't. And that's largely because men are assholes a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know that marriage is a cult. I mean, I've been married twice. My first marriage was horrible, and it was because we didn't really like each other and got into it for the wrong reasons and whatever. My current marriage is fucking amazing. It's the most important thing in my life. I would give up every dime I have before I would give up my wife, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's a cult. I think it's a difficult thing to do right. That's for sure. Especially these days, like, Angie and I, we get to spend a lot of time together. Like, we both work in the house. We see each other several times a day. We have hours together every night, blah, blah, blah. Most couples that I know who have regular jobs barely see each other, especially if they have kids and shit. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, look at it from a perspective of a woman being conditioned that she should get. Like, for example, I heard yesterday that in China, a woman who isn't married after 30 is called a leftover woman.
Ugh, oh my God.
Russia is actually pretty similar. Like, I grew up in Ukraine that's super similar to Russia. If you're a woman and you're 30 and you don't have kids and you're not married, it's like you're damaged goods. Yeah,
and that used to be true in America too. I'd say a generation ago. My mom was 25 when she had my brother, I think. And, I have my sister-in-law had her son when she was 35, right? And that's pretty normal these days. So it's interesting. Again, we can go into like feminist theory and how things are bad for women, et cetera. But I do think women, so much of society in general is just built around controlling women. Like, honestly, it just is like, and people that get mad about that are like, that's not true. I'm like, just look at it, dude. Just look at it. Like, I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying so much of our society is built around controlling women, controlling women's bodies, telling women what they can and can't do. It pisses me off personally. It's something I get really angry about.
Cool. Well, before we get into a hot topic,
sure. Ooh, exciting.
or a topic too hot, they'll melt this podcast.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Can you suggest some books? About cults and just some things that you feel
my favorite book. There's a great one called "Cults in Our Midst." That's really good. I forget the writer of that one. It's really good. There's another one, Going Clear, is about Scientology. They also made it into a HBO
I've seen that
series. Yeah, that's quite good. There also is a book by one of what is the guy's name? I'm forgetting. There's one guy who was a pretty high up inside Scientology who's now a cult deprogrammer, and he wrote a book. There's several of those out there. Besides that, there's a great podcast that I love called Cults. It's by Parcast, Parcast. Maybe there's another R in there. And that one's really good too. I just find that, what you learn when you study cults enough is it's the same thing every single time. It's the same thing every single time. It's all personality based. It's all about finding people when they're at their weakest, when they're going through some kind of horrible change, whatever. And it's about love bombing them and giving them some kind of purpose. And the big thing about cults is if you think you cannot be taken in by a cult, you are ripe to be taken in by a cult. Right? You are ripe. If you think that you're too smart and you would never fall for that and blah, 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 you're an idiot. It can happen to anybody. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care whatever. If somebody gets you at the right time and the right level of desperation and offers you community and offers you love, you will fall for it. I promise you.
That's so true. I ended up in a cult a few years back, actually, for about 18 months. Eventually they were like, okay, you should divorce your wife and you should move into the woods. And that was the moment when I was like, no, okay, I'm out. But until then, what's funny is that you realize it's a cult, but you don't really care.
Well, because you're just like, it's a family, it's community. This is the biggest thing, right? Like, we live in this world of so many people don't have any kind of community around them. right? Like, I mean, religious people have their, I mean, I think so much of what the appeal of religion is that community aspect, right? In Seattle here, there's a lot of people who have the Burning Man community, and that's a part of it. We have our marketing community, that's a part of it. But as far as just like feeling like you're part of something, most of us are so lonely. Most people, I mean, I'm 45, you're 35 or 36, I guess. Most men my age in America don't have any friends, not real ones, right? They have their wife. Their wife kind of sets up whatever the social stuff is. Like my brother, you know, he has a couple of friends from college he talks to every once in a while, and that's it. That's it. People are fucking lonely as hell these days, men, women, whatever else. Have you ever seen the movie Midsummer? Midsommar? Great movie. It's about a cult thing. It's like about this cult in Denmark or Norway or something like that. And it's funny about that movie is that like you read the reviews of it, and people that didn't like the movie are like, oh, this is so unrealistic. This kind of thing would never happen, blah, blah, blah. And I watch it and I'm like, this is all textbook. This is all textbook cult shit. This is all absolutely textbook. This is exactly what goes on as far as the love bombing, even the rituals. Oh, some people committed suicide, etc. It's all real. It's all normal. It's what people do. It's what people devolve into if we give them the opportunity to. Also, narcissistic sociopaths are everywhere, and they just get people to. It's all narcissism, right? It's all fucking narcissism that leads to so much death. Putin's narcissism, Trump's narcissism, cult leader narcissism. It just leads to death. It's horrible.
I love the association. Yeah, the lineup, you know, Putin, Trump, death. Well,
I mean, listen, man. Well, but they're both Trump. I mean, you look at either of those guys for whatever your politics are. I don't fucking care. They're total narcissists. They are incredibly insecure narcissists. You know, Putin is invading Ukraine. Why? Why is he doing that? It's because of his fucking ego. It's because of his, you know, he thinks his dick is too small. It's whatever. And how many people have died because of that so far? Because of his narcissism. Because he needs to feel a certain way. It's horrible.
Well, yeah, I guess it's a deeper conversation. I don't see it as one-sided like that about Putin. We can have another talk about that. But unfortunately, I have to just cut the episode because it's time. And before I do, though,
go for it.
I really want to put a spotlight on you and your work because aside from the fact that you're an amazing copywriter, and by the way, speaking as somebody who ethically stole your copy after you put it up on Rich Sheffer and Steeler Winners.
Oh, actually, it's a good one.
Modeled. I think I told you I modeled your forward question.
Yeah, that YouTube ad.
Yeah. So it became my third most successful ad. Still
Woohoo! That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
As far as psychology, so brilliant. It's amazing.
It's a fun one.
Just incredible. And you also built a relationship advice for women brand with with your alter ego Michael Fiore.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. However, I think where people should start by getting onto Planet Chris is by listening to your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I find extremely entertaining. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's called The Chris Haddad Show. So I started it about a year ago now. I think we just hit episode 52. And originally I started it because I was teaching copywriting. I decided that was going to be what I was going to do for a while. I did my Pig Method stuff. We did well with that. And then spent all last year trying to get that to work. And then eventually was like, oh shit, the market's too small. It's just too small. To do what I wanted to do to make the money I wanted to make with it, it was too small. But I have this podcast and it's just it's just conversations. It's very loose. It's very just like I invite people on who I think are interesting, often from the marketing business, because that's where I'm from. And then we just talk about whatever the fuck we talk about. So sometimes there's been a lot of conversations about AI and stuff like that recently. There's a lot of, psychology conversations. Then there's a lot of things like one of my favorite episodes with my buddy Scott Ruick, which I think was episode 3 or something like that. And it was just like, I think I called that one, How to Get Rich When Your Wife Hates You, or something like that. And the idea behind it was that Scott and I both had the experience of getting to be a big deal in business while simultaneously having spouses who were dedicated to tearing us down, right? And like most people don't talk about that shit, but it's very, very common. It's very common for somebody, male or female, to suddenly, get somewhere and have that happen and then have a spouse who just needs to take that away from you. So we're like, oh, let's talk about that. It's an interesting show. It's thechrishaddad.show.com. I enjoy it. I'm going to keep it going for a while, I guess, and just kind of see what happens. But it's a weird little world. I mostly just do it because it's fun and it's a great way to network.
Yeah, I hope you keep it going. It's a really good show. It's really hard for me to get into a podcast, and my podcast, playlist is really, really small. but yours is definitely on it, and I highly, highly recommend it. So where can we go to find the podcast?
Go to thechrisHaddadshow.com or just look up The Chris Haddad Show on podcast places, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, stuff like that. I called it that, by the way, The Chris Haddad Show. Originally, I was going to call it, I think it was going to be like Balls Deep with Chris Haddad, because we were going to talk about really deep things. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I think, because I had a podcast as Michael Fiore that I called Digital Romance Radio. And I think the biggest mistake I made with that podcast was just not calling it the Michael Fiore Show, because Michael Fiore had a brand and you want people to be able to find your shit as easily as humanly possible. So like that podcast I mentioned before, the Cults one, that company is called Parcast that does that. And I learned a lot from them because they have, probably 10 or 20 podcasts and they just call it what it is. Right. So their Cults podcast is called Cults. Their serial killers podcast is called Serial Killers. Their Unsolved Murders podcast is called Unsolved Murders. And it's brilliant. They could get all clever with it and you'd be like, oh, what's it about? I got to work on it. Instead, you're just like, I know exactly what it's about. So for my show, it's like, it's the Chris Haddad Show. That's what you're going to get. It's me having conversations, talking to people, seeing where it fucking goes. I do no preparation of any kind beforehand. It's fun.
Yeah. By the way, before we wrap up, Dan Kennedy called. He wants his mustache back.
Well, he can't have it. He can't have it. I'm sorry. Good old Dan. I admire Dan in many, many ways, but I'm keeping it. The thing is, when I grew this mustache, I believe it was maybe a year or two before he was supposed to die. Like, he told us he was dying. Yeah. And I was like, all right, cool. I get to keep my mustache as some kind of tribute to the great man. But then he survived. And it's not my fault. It's not my fault that he stuck around. I am happy that he did. I love the fact that when he was on his deathbed thinking he was going to die, and he wasn't even that old, he sent out a thing, basically. He sent out a promo. Like he
sent out a call to action. Keep buying GKC.
Oh my God. What a legend, man. What a fucking legend to be like on his deathbed, on his way out the door, and he's sending out a promo. Like, holy shit. Damn. I'm not sure that's how I don't know if I want to live that way, but I think it's fucking awesome that he did.
No, I think he's I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other night, and she's like, who are the philosophers, the speakers, the authors who speak to you? You know what I mean? And I came up only with one name. It's Dan Kennedy. Virtually amazing. Everything that man ever said, it just hits. I mean, for me, every single time. He's
a brilliant guy. For whatever reason, I've never really had the chance to meet him or get to know him. I knew Glazer pretty well. And Mara Glazer is a friend of mine, but never really got to know Dan at all for whatever reason.
Well, because you didn't have a fax machine. So
I didn't have a fax machine. That's what it is. But again, like, you learn so much from Dan about, like, you hear all the stories, the fax machine, you hear the stories about all the stuff that Dan Kennedy has. But if you know people that know him or have been through certain of his courses, he'll be the first one to tell you it's all his character. Right? It's all out there for a reason. Even my stuff, when I was doing the Chris Haddad copywriting stuff, everything I put out there, I know what I'm doing, right? Like, as far as even when I get angry at people online, I know what I'm doing. I know the impact it's having on my audience. Like, it's not like I'm just like raging out or something. I'm like, I think raging out would be the right thing to do right now. I think it's going to go well if I do that. But I just like the fact that, it's all a performance to some degree, right? Like, being online in general, being in marketing, you are playing a character to some degree or another. No matter how genuine that character is, you're still playing a character.
I'd say it's an embellished version of yourself.
Yeah. It's like a pro wrestling thing, right? Like, it's you look at, like, Steve Austin used to say that, like, the best character is just you turned up to 11. Right. So, like,
good point.
He was a beer drinking redneck, but he wasn't Stone Cold Steve Austin. He just turned that on. Right. Yeah.
I was the Rocks fan, so I hated Steve Austin. But I hated, you know what I mean? But
fair enough. Fair enough. Well, that means he was doing a good job, man, right? Like, that's their job, is to get. I love pro wrestling, and I love it because you learn a lot about storytelling, like primal human storytelling, and you learn a lot about good and evil, and like, there's something so beautiful about watching somebody who knows how to be the bad guy, like, walk out there and just get booed to oblivion. It's like, that is beautiful. That is not easy to do. Yeah,
it is. Look, I'm so sad that we have to wrap up. But thank you so much for spending this time with me.
You're welcome, my friend.
Had a pleasure hosting you, and anticipate another invite.
Well, we'll have you on my show next, and then I'll ask you questions for an hour. It'll be good.
Awesome. Can't wait, man.
All right, cool.